Want to thank Wolfgang for jumping in early for us today. It's really a big help. So I thank our sponsors, which is Epson Photo Shelter, Pro Photo Daily, and American Photography. Tonight starts a week of 3 nights where we'll have five award-winning, highly respected photojournalists coming in and showing us, their latest work covering the Ukraine Russian war. So we'll have it tonight, Thursday, and then Monday and Tuesday. And on our list of presenters is Carol Guzzi, Marianne Staub, Shereel Covey, Natalie Kesar. And tonight we have a dear friend who's been now, I think this is your third time, Wolfgang Schwan, who is presenting. So share your screen and off we go.
Do. So yeah, thanks for having me back, Frank. I think it's his third or fourth, actually.
Yeah, so
Um,
before you even start, I got to ask you, with the money being approved from DC, like does that, with the aid going now, back to Ukraine, what happens within the community of photojournalists? Are you all sort of a buzz that are, now something else is going to happen? Like, how do you guys discuss that, or the editors are getting to you? Does anything like change like dramatically right away?
no, I don't. It's not going to be like Ukraine now could just immediately go on the offensive, and there's going to be cities taken. I think I can kind of talk about this with things that I've
Okay,
seen,
great.
but more so, it's going to let them stop this onslaught that's been going on, and I'll talk about that in a bit.
Okay,
But
great.
so I to everybody that I haven't talked to yet, I'm Wolfgang Schwan. I'm a photojournalist from Philadelphia. I've worked extensively in Ukraine over the past 3 years now, and this is all from a most recent trip in February through beginning of April. I just got back, so this is kind of a bunch of photos that I didn't properly. It's a little bit organized. It's mostly just chronological. So this was the first day that I was working here on this trip, but so it was a very interesting trip where I got in there February 19th, I believe. And this is right after the fall of Avdiivka, and morale in the Ukrainian civil or civilian population and the military was quite low. And I hadn't experienced it this low up to this point. That's due to the number of factors. I think that Avdiivka was kind of like the final loss up to that point that was just like a little bit overbearing. There's that. There's the lack of aid coming in, which now has been resolved, as Frank just said, which was shown in huge ammo shortages and deficits, where the Ukrainians are firing one shell to the 10 that Russian are firing. Then there's big mobilization issues that has since been a little bit resolved in their parliament. On I think it was the day after I left in April that they passed this bill, but basically Ukrainian soldiers were seeing that civilians were resisting this bill and they didn't want to fight. Into the soldiers' perspective, like, we're out here, we're fighting for like the freedom of this country. Why does no one else give a fuck about us, kind of thing? And then to the civilians, it's like everyone has different priorities. Like, some people you want to go defend your family, and then some people want to live for their family and with their family. So it's not that there's like a right or a wrong thing. It's just different perspectives, as you would have in any society in any war. So that was causing problems. And then on the Russian side, there's zero issue with mobilization and conscription, and they're cranking out 130,000 conscripts every 3 months. And the beginning of the war, they came into Ukraine with 200,000, and it's kind of guesstimate now that there's approximately 5 to 700,000 Russians in Ukraine at the moment. So they have no problem in getting new troops. There's also been the FPV development. I have a few stories on this in here, but the Ukrainians have just been kind of suffering loss and loss and loss, like on the aid, the ground, the amount of troops and attrition, and the mood felt very bleak for the first time. And I've talked on here before and to many other places how, like, every time I'd gone to Ukraine, it's such a hopeful place, and like people that have this perseverance about them that they will win and whatever it takes, and like everyone is kind of together. And it was the first time I had gone, and it felt not so much like that, and like a much more somber, not like a defeated sense, but more deflated, and like people would have to adjust to this new reality.
And
And by the
Wolfgang,
time I left in,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
How do you measure that morale? Is that from speaking to the local people? I mean, like, how do you get that texture?
Yeah, so it was mostly on this trip. I mostly worked with military for the 2 months I was there, but talking to friends in Kiev and other colleagues that had been living there, um, kind of that where it just everyone you could feel it. It was like palpable in the air that like
Really?
things were now a bit different and like not as optimistic, I suppose.
Right.
Um, but so here, we'll get started. This was the very first day that I worked. This is a unit I've worked with before called the Black Tulips, where the guy on the right in the back, he's the leader of this. I have his name in the caption somewhere, but so he's been doing this since 2014, and he collects bodies of Ukrainians and Russians. They don't photograph the Ukrainian bodies for like morale and respect reasons and whatnot, but interesting that they do show the Russian ones and how this program works, where he collects them. He does his best to identify them based on what's in their pockets. If they have passport, that's easy. If not, he tries to figure out like what unit they're from, the brigade, all of that. So then gives that information over, and they do a kind of like a corpse exchange on the border. This is like the one place where there's like diplomatic relations along the border of Ukraine and Russia. I didn't get to go to that spot. Hopefully in the future I can.
And
But they
and
do a
yeah, and the
go ahead.
Black Tulips are they an international organization?
No, it's just Ukrainian. He's been doing it since
Right. Okay.
2014 with I don't know what I just did. He's been doing it since 2014 with the fighting in the East and do, has had a lot of success with it. And it's like one
Right.
of the only ways that they're able to get these bodies back. And then so when I got there, we had like a few days like where we had to wait until getting access to military. And there's always this in Kramatorsk, there's a train that comes every single day, and soldiers have their part while they're on their 3 day leave. They have their partners come to town, girlfriends, whatever, or boyfriends if it's a woman soldier. And it's kind of this like happy moment of people getting to see each other, people saying goodbye. Um, and also when I had gotten there, sorry, my dog's going to be crying this whole time. But also when I had gotten there, the fall of Avdiivka was happening, and there was like this very big pocket that was collapsing of the Ukrainians, and the Russians were pushing forward a bit. So we did a few of these civilian and evacuation stories, and this is back at the Pokrovsk train, which in the fall of 22, when the sort of like Donbass offensive had started and the Russians had pulled out of Kiev and Chernihiv. This is the train that everyone was seeing, and I hadn't seen this filled in a year and a half, and now we were starting to see that again because all of the villages and towns to the east of Avdiivka in like a 15-20 mile area were starting to be evacuated. So here was some civilians on this train that we had been on in the past years, and it's interesting to see how this is kind of like a cycle where people leave, they come back, and then this happens again. Um, this is Karahova. There was a aerial bomb that had hit in the town. The Russians are using these things called cabs, which is basically like a dumb bomb that we have. The equivalent would be a JDAM, where it's like an old dumb bomb, and they put some sort of like fin or glides on it, and then it can be precise. They like outfit it with modern technologies, and they can drop these things from 40 to 60 kilometers behind the front line from an airplane, and it just glides in. There's no answer for this on the Ukrainian side. And this was one of the big issues in Avdiivka, where the Russians were dropping up to 30 to 40 of these a day. At 500 kilo bomb can take out like half of a building and collapse it. So there's not. It lowers your chances of places to hide. Is this leaving when someone joins, or am I tapping something?
Jay.
When somebody comes in and leaves, the sound comes on. So I'll mute it for you. It helps me find out, but if it bothers you, I'll ask
Oh
you
no,
a
no, I
question.
mean where it crashes me out.
No, no worries. I'll mute it.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Anyway, so this is a um artillery team with, see, that's what I mean. Like I didn't touch anything there. It does that beep and then it boots out of the
It's
slideshow.
off
I
now.
have to go back.
Let's see.
Okay. So this was an artillery team in the area of Karahova, and currently they're having a really hard time down there. This was 79th Brigade. They're an air assault group, and in the pocket that goes, they're basically between Vugledar and Avdiivka. The Russians have been pushing there. What?
Why is that happening, Jay?
Not quite sure this time because it's definitely off. There wasn't a beep that time.
Hmm.
Let's see.
Right.
Hopefully it stops.
Yeah, this was a day that we did with the 24th in a repair depot, working on just fixing the vehicles. And it's interesting seeing like the kind of industry of war and how much material gets used and destroyed and to get fixed. And I think there was one of the interesting things where I didn't have a photo of it just because they have like this one rule that like kind of bothers me where it's like no license plates of vehicles, and it's like, why are there license plates like on the military vehicles that are always like super prominent like in the front, and it's like the giant Euro ones. But there was a Humvee that like you could only photograph it from one angle, and learned that, so they have a lot of Humvees. You see these everywhere. And one of the issues that you don't really think about, it's like the Americans and many other countries, they're sending lots and lots of aid via just material and vehicles or ammunition. And in the case of us, the Americans sending Humvees, we send a lot of those things, but zero parts. So these things break all the time. Axles break, the radiator gets shot or whatever it is, and the guys are like just welding little bits of like a Lada radiator into an American Humvee radiator and having to like be creative and just be mechanics. But it's interesting to see how this like grinds on, and the guys behind the scenes that are in the army but they're not the combatants, the support staff, that are keeping this churning forward. This was a airstrike that happened earlier in the day. We showed up in the evening. It landed in the yard of a home and pretty severely damaged it. There was no casualties. So I did quite a few days where we were with soldiers as they were training, and it was pretty interesting for me to see how dedicated many of the different brigades are to keeping their guys sharp. Well, they'll have their soldiers on a just average of like 3 to 7 day rotation where they're on the front, and then they'll be back maybe the same ratio, maybe less, at the base. And then they'll have, say that they're out for 4 days, they're back for 4 days. When they're back for 4 days, they'll have 1 or 2 days of holiday or vacation. They can do what they want, and then it's 2 days of training. And they want the guys to stay sharp while they're back. So this day was with 79th Brigade, and they got half of the medics from the entire brigade to come together, and they were working on new strategies for pulling out soldiers in like high risk situations during shellings. And they had gotten this vehicle donated to them from United 24 is a like volunteer production company fundraising unit kind of thing where they'll like attach themselves to a unit, they'll make a bunch of content, make a video, and then people fundraise to it. And they got these guys this Canadian sort of, it's kind of like an MRAP, but not, there's no like turret hole or anything like that. It's just a big armored vehicle. And so these medics are training on like how to quickly pull a soldier out of danger via this little sled, like a skid, I think is what they call it. And like, so they'll wrap the guy up and like, how do we drag him really quick, like over bumpy terrain? Sometimes guys would be like shooting next to them and whatnot, and quickly get him in there. So it was interesting to see how dedicated they are to like staying sharp and evolving and trying new tactics. And the one thing that keeps surprising me every single time I go is the advancements in drone technology. This is a Valkyrie, which is purely a surveillance drone. It can fly pretty high, it's fast, and it just sort of does like a grid pattern over a huge area, and they collect all this data, and then there'll be 1 to 3 guys that comb over that hour or two of footage and just kind of look at everything with a magnifying glass on their computer later on in the day.
And Wolfgang, is the access still the same as it was, a year and a half ago, where they're letting you in as many places as you want to go near the military?
This trip, it was quite good, just in terms of there wasn't as many journalists there as there was a year ago.
Hmm.
Just so you have more brigades that are open to work. The type of access has changed a bit. Like there's not many units that are allowing access to like 0 point positions, and that's something to do with this with drones, that just both sides are watching all the time, and the advent of the FPV drone in the past year has really changed things, where it is infinitely more dangerous along the front line, just be getting to and from like the all the way at the 0 point. So the only times that I was allowed to go, we ended up turning it down both times, but it was going to be going out at after sunset and then leaving before sunrise. And for just still photos, it's like that's
Yeah.
not the huge amount of risk for just totally dark photos. We did not do that. But so these are FPV drones, and this is part of the big problem where these things, they buy or fabricate them for roughly $200 strap. This is a battery that's sitting on the top of it, and an extra battery so that they can add more weight to it, and it can like sustain maybe like 30 minutes of flight time, and it can fly up to, with an antenna, 20 kilometers. And it's a guy with like the Google goggle looking things that just sits back a few kilometers and flies this thing. You can take out, if you hit a tank in the hatch hole, you can take out a several $1 million tank. You can take out a few soldiers. Sometimes they get like real creative. Both sides do this, but like they'll have the explosive composition B or something, or dynamite, and then they'll put like a whole bunch of like ball bearings or screws or whatever and make a claymore or some type of mine. And this has been very, very effective for both sides, in that it's like extremely cheap to make, and it's devastating, and it's very, very precise. And there was a couple days that we got to spend time with commanders like this is in a base with 21st Brigade, where we just see how they're watching the drones all day. And not with these guys, with one other. We were with this is Hartship Brigade, and this commander was an awesome guy. And so we went out with the intention of photographing artillery firing. And so he's a battery commander that all day he sits in this basement, watches 8 different drones that are different ones coming up and going down, and seeing like what's on the battlefield and like what to fire at. And he'll see a Russian like walking towards something, he doesn't know what yet, and just waits and sees where he goes. And is he going into like a little bunker? Is he meeting up with friends? Okay, he just went in this trench, let's see what happens. And then he comes out with 2 3 guys. That's a better target, so then he fires on that, and he chooses, he's in control of, I think it was like two different types of howitzer, like a 105 and a 152, or he can fire grads, or he can call in the drone guys that have FPVs, and like seeing what they use for different situations was quite interesting.
Wow.
And then this is with White Angels. These guys are absolutely amazing. They do civilian. I should have had this at the beginning, but I didn't really organize this that great. So when the Avdiivka pocket was collapsing, these are a police unit that strictly does evacuations and bringing humanitarian aid towards civilians in like really, really hot areas. This is in the town of Ocheretne, which now in the past week has almost fallen to the Russians, in their push from Avdiivka to Pokrovsk. So this is one of the first big towns on that highway that is potentially going to be a problem for Pokrovsk. If the Russians can push to that town, that's the big rail hub for all of Donbass. And so these guys, they go out, they get a call the night before, and a civilian wants to be evacuated. They go find that person and try and convince them to leave. This was a town of maybe a few thousand, and there's like tops 100 people living there a month and a half ago. And now that it's half taken by the Russians, I imagine even less. But even at the time, it's like you look at this building every single window is blown out. There's craters all over the town. It's at the time, I think, like 4 kilometers from the 0 point, and there's still a shop working. Is like always in these towns. Like there's something that it's just like, how is this still functioning? It's crazy. That she's still getting Pringles in on the shelves is wild. But
And Wolfgang, with all the drones in the sky, can you hear them all the time? I mean, just like as you described those 3 or 4 Russians walking along a road, they don't hear that drone?
so it depends. It depends on what it is. You can have a Mavic, like a standard commercial one that you or I would use, and
Right.
if you fly it up high enough, like you can have one of those like at like a kilometer in the sky, you wouldn't hear it that high, but its vision wouldn't be as good. You can get like a broad look. You can see if vehicles are coming down the roads. Um, FPVs you would see or you would hear when they're coming near you,
Mm,
and it's like a very like it's a more sharp like whistling noise. And like I don't know this as well, but like the soldiers over time they like learn these things and they'll know when. Also when you're with the soldiers, usually when we go out, you're with a press officer and then you're with like a local that just guide, like who's like the battery commander or he's in charge of whatever unit that you're going to meet, and he's the one that brings you to that location.
yeah.
um and that guy will be in touch with the base, and they have tools now where they have scanners that can see what's in the sky. So there's like a little antenna that someone's using, and then it tells you there's FPVs inside of 5 kilometers. There's an Orlan is like the one where you don't Orlan, and I think it's like a Stella or something, are two of like they call them super scanners, where it's a almost like a Reaper, but not that quite advanced, where it's like 30,000 feet in the air. But these ones with like a very, very advanced camera that just all they're doing is like surveillance. And if those spot you, then like something serious is going to fly in towards you.
Right.
So yes and no. Like if you're just out with like these guys would not have as good of information just because it's police than like the military units that are out there. Um, but sometimes yes. And then there is a photo coming up with these guys where there's this was a babushka that they were trying to take. She ended up, it was like 1 week of like hell in this town, and then that morning it was totally fine. And then you get this thing with civilians there where they're like, oh well, like it hasn't been shelling for the last 5 hours, so like maybe the war is over. And then now, I'm sure she
Really?
called again and got them to take her, but decided that morning that it was calm. So, like, maybe it's fine now. And they're like, no, I'm sure it'll start again probably as soon as we leave. But she chose to stay. And then, so they just dropped off food and left. But this was in the yard of that woman. And the day before, this is an FPV drone with an RPG warhead attached to it, landed in the yard. And so it's close enough that those can fly in. This one just the battery died or it failed or whatever happened. It didn't explode. But so this was another woman that they ended up evacuating in one of the towns in the Avdiivka area. This is outside of Chasiv Yar, which is now like a focal point of the fighting with an artillery team. And so this is these couple photos are interesting to me just to kind of show you guys like how whenever you see photos of artillery working, like usually this is like the way things work. You're in a bunker with soldiers. Someone has the radio, the unit commander, and he's just waiting for the call on what to fire at and when. And they sit all day just smoking cigarettes, drinking coffee, just waiting, waiting, waiting. And then they get a call that this is what you have to fire at now. Sometimes it's like a little bit more important, like their guys are under fire, they're being stormed, or there's a vehicle that's high priority, there's a tank firing somewhere, they need to fire at that. Immediately, everyone just sprints out of the thing. This is like the photo. It was really almost dark out, and somehow cameras are great now, like where you can lift it up like 5 stops in post production. But this is like very, very dark conditions. They sprint out, they hop in this. This is a mobile howitzer. I think is like a 152. They're in it, and in like 1 minute, the thing is firing. And then very quickly, everybody is like running back because the Russians have counter battery, and that can be fired on very quickly. So like these types of photos, like whenever you see it, it's like you're 2 to 7 kilometers back from the front, but it's like to like make that fiery shot. It's such like a sprinting from safety out into something that could be dangerous, and like there's like maybe FPVs or something could be flying overhead that could see it, and then that fireball that happened, this one's not that great of a photo, but like the fireball that happens can be like 1/100th of a second, so like you do miss them a lot. um
And
and
Wolfgang,
then
when you sprint out, how far out are you sprinting from that bunker?
it depends. This one, it was like far and down a hill, and I think like the one journalist that I was with, he like kind of like rolled down part of it, and but it was like I was like trying to like keep up with the soldier and like looking like through my camera at the same time, and somehow it didn't fall. That one was like maybe like 80-90 yards away. Sometimes it's like right next to the thing. If it's a mortar, sometimes they're like staying in a house in the basement. There's lots of pickle cellars is very common in the villages in Ukraine. And then they will have like the mortar just in the yard of the house that they're staying in. Like they'll dig a little hole and they'll have like a canopy over it. They'll remove the canopy, fire quickly, and then they'll go back to the pickle cellar. Um, So this was another artillery team. Also, I think I've talked about Salo on here before, the pig fat in Ukraine. I found out that on this trip you can fry it, and it was a life-changing thing
I
for me.
bet.
Um, Very good. So this is in Kremenaya, the forest in between Liman, Siversk, and Kremenaya. Um, this is a tracked vehicle that was transporting soldiers away from the front. This is just your average. This is with a mortar team, and this is kind of what it looks like when they're sitting and they're waiting. You're having coffee, you're hanging out, just waiting for one of those walkie-talkies to go off that we've got something to fire at. And so during this time, I think this day it was one of 4 in a row that I went out towards the beginning of this trip where there was none of the teams that I was with fired their weapons because of this ammunition shortage. And so we waited. I think we were out there for like 4 or 5 hours and nothing came in. And then they decided they're going to send us back because it was a little bit of a drive through the
And
forest.
and Wolfgang, is there like sort of a clock to the day? Like that's it for today? I mean, does that kind of notice come through, or is it 24 hours constantly on, just different shifts, guys taking sleeps, but is it on
For the
all?
soldiers, so there's certain, it depends on what's happening. So usually like they will fire, it's safe to assume that like they will be firing more in the evening and at dusk, just because like the drones have a harder time seeing like during like the gray hour, like when things are changing from night, like the thermal camera doesn't work as well when it's getting light, and then the regular cameras don't work as well like before it's too light. Also, there's more troop movement during those times because like shifts are rotating and people are moving more. Um, so they do just on average work a little bit more then. But then if you're in an area where the Russians are assaulting more and they're storming, the Ukrainians will be firing much more. So those times like they could fire, like you could be out for an hour and it's like they fire 10, 15 times, maybe more, 30 times or something like that. Or you could be out for 10 hours and nothing happens. Um, this was just a helicopter while we were driving. These guys were soldiers outside of Chastov Yar that they were staying at um, their house, and then they were gearing up to go out for a 5-day rotation. They man I think it's a Dushka, which is like their equivalent of a 50 cal machine gun. So they run like a machine gun encampment. This was down in the city of Vugledar, which was pretty prominent in the news last year for the 79th and part of 56th Brigade, this special battalion called Sarmat, defended that city last year. And you saw like it was something like 110 Russian tanks destroyed in 2 or 3 days in that city. And they are still holding this. And so this city is constantly just battered by artillery, by drones. The city itself is 2 kilometers from the 0 point. So there's FPVs that fly in. We happened to go on a super quiet day just by chance. And all day, the soldiers mostly just sit in these little cellars that are underneath these buildings that sometimes you can't even stand up all the way. And just kind of like wait for firing their artillery or like moving closer towards the front if they're on a more frontline thing. There are still a handful of civilians that live here. This
And
old
these
woman.
folks just will not leave.
No, so this lady, I guess, I ran into a soldier later who was from Vuhledar just through a friend, and he wanted to see all these photos. And he was like looking at these, and he's just like, oh, like this separatist bitch, like I know her, and like she's like a Russian supporter, and like so like you get
Uh,
a lot of the people that are still in like this situation. Like, why would you like look at the building behind her? This is how she's living. Like, she still has nice clothes. Like she's not an alcoholic that's just like doesn't have anything else to do. It's like she takes care of herself. She looks fine. She could be staying there because she wants to be on the other side is a thing. Like those people are definitely in the huge minority, but they are there and they're referred to as Jduny, which is those who wait. And like they're waiting for the other side to come. Um, so out of a town of 40,000, if there's 100 people that are still living there, like that is a huge minority that would be that type of person. And some of those people also, it's just like they're stubborn, they don't want to leave, but the vast majority of people do
yeah.
get away from the situation. But you do run into the occasional civilian that stays. Um, and then these were just shots inside of the building. This is just a nice road shot of dust and stuff. This was a cool experience for me. I had not been invited to a sauna in 2 years in Ukraine, and then got invited to one that was like with soldiers in their encampment, and got the full treatment where they're like hitting you with like the wet maple leaves and all of that. Um, and it was quite nice. And this is just the guys sweating. But that was a nice little vacation night.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be like in these kind of moments, like there's a sense of humanity, right? I mean,
Yeah. It was really, really nice. And so
and
these guys I ended up staying with for about 10 days and just kind of photographed them training and hearing about them. So the guy that's on the left there and the guy with the tattoo on his back, this is a commander of what's called Sarmat Battalion, which is their own independent battalion that gets attached to different groups, and they're attached to 56 currently. Um, and they are an assault battalion, so like they have BMPs and they storm trenches. Like their whole doctrine is like they're pushing and like trying to advance on Russians. And so I'd met these guys in Peasky 2 weeks before the war started, and him and I got along. I'd sent like a bunch of photos over to them. They were really great to us. And Peasky is like right outside. It's a suburb of Donetsk, so it's like you can see the airport from there. And on this trip, one of these days with the White Angels, I worked very close to that area. We were 2 towns away from Piski, which is now occupied. And I found this guy's phone number and messaged him, hey man, like if you're still alive, like I'd love to grab coffee sometime. It's been 2 years, like would love to hear how you're doing. And one second, my cord wasn't plugged in. And so it's been 2 years and I knew they were an assault group. So there's like high chance that maybe he's not still around. So fortunately, I met up with him and they were still around, and he invited me to come and stay on their base. So I did, and I photographed how they were training and all of this. And it was a really nice experience to spend a longer time with the soldiers, because a lot of the time when we go out, it's a short amount of time, like 1 hour to a few hours with a press officer. I'm just going to flip through these as I talk about this. But when you go out for 1 hour to guys that are on the front line or like they're working, you show up with a camera. You don't get to really talk to them and ask too many questions. It's like you're just making the material that you need. And it feels like you're like photographing an animal in a zoo. And like that's how I feel. Sometimes that's how soldiers feel, and they don't like the experience. And I don't always like the experience. Um, so to spend more time with them and like hear the stories that make them more than just a dude in camouflage that is firing his gun towards the other side was something like really special for me. So this was it was interesting just to see the how these guys grind and train nonstop. When they come back, they get 2 days off. They do 5 days out, 5 days back, and they get 2 days off, then 3 days of training, and then they go back to the front.
but the
So they're
commanders stay
constantly doing.
around. The commanders are staying around all the time, or they get these 5 days off as well.
It depends. It depends. So sometimes different groups do different things where this commander, he will go out and like go check out the front line and stuff. Like he's a he's like a young guy that went to military academy and is like gung-ho. And he wants to do what his soldiers are doing, like for the respect of all of his guys. And but they'll rotate guys out where like they not only are just like hanging out here, like he'll give them like 2 weeks, go back to Kiev, see your family kind of thing. Like we have it covered here, which like they're not really supposed to be doing, but as long as like they have the situation covered and it's not like the hottest place along the front line, they can get away with it.
Right.
So yeah, these are all training shots with that one group doing different things. Where they'll be doing like nighttime exercises, trench clearing, moving as like formations, working like on a BMP, getting off of that like during an assault, like loading back up with wounded, whatever it may be. And yeah, these guys were very, very good to me. And this was a group of them that they were gearing up to head out for their 5 days. And then this is just destruction around Donbass. This is in the town of Toretsk. This is an old Soviet mining town, is what this says, that it's the Soviet Union, and then Toretsk, something about the mine that's in that area. And then these are from the aerial bombs that Russia's using, where one of these 500-kilo bombs can hit into a building and then just collapse an entire section of it. So it's becoming less and less safe, even if you are in these giant like concrete bunkers. This was a guy that I had met last year, who I just bumped into in this town of Bogorodechny. Like you might have seen this church before. It's like pretty picturesque with other people's photos. I'd gone back to this town, bumped into this guy that I had chased around last year, and it was nice to catch up with him. And then most of the rest of this is just more military photos, so I'm just going to flip through these pretty quick. But this is a mortar team in the area of Toretsk. This guy, the commander there in this one, I had met him a year ago, so it's like always nice like working there so much and like you see these guys again. And same kind of thing, like where can be like bothering to the soldiers to like you come in. This is Serhiy. If you don't ever you should get him on at some point. Serhiy's amazing. He works with Wall Street Journal. I forgot that I had this in here. But to bump into the same soldiers again, like you get like a little bit more like rapport with them, that they're like, oh, he's not just out here for 5 minutes. Like this guy comes out a lot. Like I saw him here last year. He keeps coming over like the other side of the world. Like they like that. And I like seeing the guys again. Coffee and cigarettes is how the war churns forward. And then same thing with like this is basically the condition of how guys will live on a 5-day stay near the front. And artillery teams. And it's very much this like you run out, they fire, and then immediately it gets covered back up, and then they're back in they call it like a blindage. This is in the town of Siversk. This is civilian graves, some of them quite recent. And Siversk has been like semi-encircled for quite some time. This was a nighttime shot with a D-30. Field fire on the drive home one night.
And
this
Wolfgang,
is yeah.
How do you deal with, just from an emotional level, coming back and forth, to these places and then back to Philly and then back, how does that work for you?
So I on this trip on like I think like the first trip was like the one that I had like probably the most like trauma that I had to actually work through on like things that I had seen. Where you had like Bucha and it's like much more like civilian casualties and all of that. And like I'm quite good at like I think on like seeing things that like are bothering me and like I'm acting in a way that I don't prefer, like that I'm like more sad, like maybe I like am like more not really short tempered. I don't ever freak out, but like the things are bothering me, like I'll address that talking to people. And then the main thing that I do notice is that doing this kind of work, I'm firing at more cylinders the entire time. Like to myself, I feel like I'm doing more important work than what I'm doing at home. it's much more involved. Like you're constantly all day trying to find things to do for the coming day, for the coming week. Meeting people, you're having to like talk through translators, do just more things in your head. So it's a much greater stimulation. It's also dangerous. You're talking to people at home that are concerned about you. And it's just like more things are happening. And then when I come home, it's you kind of crash for a bit. And that's been getting much, much better. Like this time it was basically just jet lag after 2 months of this. But I think it depends on like what it is that you're seeing. But for the most, I would just describe it as like how when you're on vacation and you have to adjust to coming home. Obviously, this isn't fun like a vacation, but it's that kind of like it's like a different stimulation for your brain
Mm.
than regular life. And like you have to have that like adjustment period where it's like, okay, everything is slow and it's like not as exciting would be the like a good way to describe it. And you just have to like calm back down to regular things. And I've had in the past where it's like a week of like feeling like kind of depressed from like just like the lack of stimulation on more boredom, I guess, getting used to that. But hopefully that answers that.
Yeah. And your friends and
Um,
family are aware of this, right? I mean, they're sort of therapeutic to you as well.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Like at this point, like everyone knows how I kind of operate with that.
Yeah.
On this trip when I came back, it was like almost it was pretty much just jet lag that I had for a couple of days. And it depends on like how you're working, who you're working with, like how the environment is while you're there. Um, this I finished off the trip with like an amazing fixer that was like super fun, and we became great friends, and it was like very high spirits for the last 10 days that I was there. So that always helps. If like you're around good company, um, I think you can do better work and it's better. This was like one of my favorite moments on like the last day that I was working there. We got to photograph. It was like Azov versus 63 or 66th Brigade in this like little soccer match. And it was like such like a nice fitting end to like 2 months straight of just like working with military like every single day. Like seeing the guys out having fun was like a really like kind of nice special ending. And then actually, we did that midday, and then we went out to this was a stabilization point along the front line. This is a little bit graphic, heads up to everyone. So this guy got his leg amputated from shelling, and but when I found that like when I work with doctors, these guys, the guy on the left is an anesthesiologist. Those are two assistants, an anesthesiologist assistant, and then an OR assistant. And then there's the guy in the tan t-shirt here. He's a abdominal specialty surgeon. These guys would be chopping off legs in regular life from car accidents. And like realistically, it's like they're saving this guy's life and like they're all in high spirits about what they do. So like I feel like depending on who you're around, that kind of dictates like how you absorb a situation where like seeing someone's leg get cut off is not an ideal thing to witness and it can be quite traumatic. But like when you're with doctors that like this is what they do and like they're happy that they're saving this guy's life, that gives a different perspective on the situation, I think.
Yeah.
So that it's not so grim for you. And this one was like a little bit interesting where um they like kind of made me participate in things because like I was like too I didn't help like cut his leg off, but like I was like a little bit too in the way in this small room. So it kept being like I would get snapped at and like pointed and like had to like keep grabbing things like for them and like hand like more gauze or like they need like this little clamp or whatever. And I would have to stop taking photos for a second. So um but this guy did make it. They had to do like a high thigh amputation, and then they take him away to um, the hospital. So that was all of it. But yeah, just real quick talking about. So I was my youngest brother. His partner is an OR. She's like the nurse in operating rooms. And so I was sending her those photos from the last thing, and she was like, "This is insane! Like, how are these guys? Like, why aren't they in like full like
Mm.
whatever you call like clean outfits?" And it's like this guy's in camouflage with a helmet. Like, what the fuck is happening here? And so it's like I was describing to her how like this is like the equivalent of like paramedics, kind of like it's a stabilization point that's 1 kilometer from the front, and it doesn't work like a NATO army in Ukraine because you can't just fly a helicopter to the guy that's injured. You have to, he gets injured in the trench, and then medics, who their only job is to like kind of stop what's happening so that guy survives the drive to the stabilization point that could be like 1-ish kilometers from the front, and then their job is to make it so that he can survive the 1 to 2 hour drive through back roads in this swampy forest to a real hospital. And so this is that point that's 1 kilometer back, and they've had to move real doctors. Like, this is a surgeon and an anesthesiologist who went to 8 years of school in Western countries, and like very valuable doctors are now sitting in extremely dangerous situations so that they can keep these soldiers alive and move them back. Whereas like every war that we, the US, has fought, it's like total air dominance, and like you just get a helicopter in there, you get a Humvee in there, and they just get taken to the hospital in 1 hour, in ideal situations. But this, it could be like 3, 4, 10 hours until that guy gets to the actual hospital. So there's a lot more like front end work on making sure that he can make it that
Mm.
way. And they're adapting to it quite well. It's interesting to see how that works. So yeah, that was the whole. Sorry, that was so many photos, but
No, no, no,
um,
that's great. Yeah, you could
you
stop
guys caught
sharing.
me 1 week after I came back.
Yeah. No, that was so what is the total amount of time that you've been there? If you add it all together.
I think like 15, 16 months since January of 22.
Wow.
Over, I think 6 trips now, 6 or 7 trips.
And do you feel like, this is becoming your defining project for your career? I mean, as it relates to where you are now?
I think for where I am right now, I don't know about for, we'll see what happens in the
Yeah,
rest of my life.
right.
I don't know. I think it's like it's more than something that I just wanted to just dip in very quick and like kind of make photos of, as it was spot news in the beginning of the war. It's like I wasn't there from 2014 through 2022, and since 22 though, I've wanted to learn more and more about it, and have become like a valuable asset to the agency that I work for, and that like I've learned enough and I know how to navigate the situation there that I can report more effectively than someone who just hops in.
Yeah.
And certainly more than I could have 2 years ago when I was working there. And it's a fascinating place that I think news will keep coming from there for quite some time. So
So, so
it's an
what
investment that I'm happy to make.
Yeah. So Wolfgang, what is the motivation? What grabs you to want to continue? Is it the people that you're meeting? Is it the cause? Like, because I'm sure you do other projects where you're in and out, and it's a month or whatever it is. What makes you gravitate to want to keep on covering it? Is it a personal thing? Is it an assignment type of thing? Like, what is it? Because now it feels, after having you 3 or 4 times, you're in. You're all in
Mm-hmm.
to this experience until the end, and then the rebuilding as well. What is it that happens to you or to a typical photojournalist in that way? And I don't know if that you can describe it, but just it's a thought.
That's a really good question. So I think you could talk about that for quite some time. But yeah, so I mean, I went in 22, just kind of trying to do a story about like the environmental cost in Donbass with like mines shutting down and how they've been damaged since 2014 and how this will get worse if the full scale invasion happens. And then ended up just working for the Wire the whole time, doing trench life of the soldiers. But in that time, I had a sociology PhD guy as my fixer, and he got me into like reading a few books on the history of the place. And I love geopolitics, and it's like a region of the world you could spend your entire life learning about. And I sort of fell into that, and I really, there's like nothing better than getting to have a region or area, if this is your home, wherever it is, that you're fascinated by, and then getting to meet and talk to people who their lives intersect that history at like a crucial moment in time. And then I get to go there, I get to keep learning about this like broad history, and then be there for news at the very crucial moment, like where history is being written right now, and then pick like the average Joe or whoever and talk to them about like what that all means to them, and then share that with you guys or a wider audience. And like, so I get to scratch my curiosity and then like share it with others. Is like what I really, really enjoy about this job. For Ukraine in particular, it's like it's definitely it's the people, it's the atmosphere there. It's I think I've maybe it's just because I've been there so much, like I've made so many friends and just feel a bit more invested there than other things.
So, and that just happens by the process sort of of osmosis, right? You're there longer and the people are engaging to you, and then it's just sort of happens, right?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, there's like, I mean, I grew up in like Berks County, Pennsylvania, and I spent 18 years there, and I have like no desire to ever go back. So like, if maybe I don't know, like certain areas like rub you better than others, but
Right.
yeah, I think just I've had a lot of like really nice connections and like really really meaningful experiences there, and I do deeply care about the area, and am happy to keep going and telling the stories there.
And what's the plan now? When do you go back? How what's going to happen?
So I'm going to stay in Philadelphia until the end of summer with my dog who's been wanting to go out this whole time.
Yeah.
Um, Probably until August and September, I will go for 2 months back over to Ukraine. We'll see. There's talk of a Russian offensive in the Kharkiv area maybe this summer. So if that happens, I might go back for like more spot news kind of stuff. But we'll see what happens. I think that Russia at the moment is coming back to your question right before we started about this US aid that's been
Right.
coming in. Russia has been on the offense and more so the past couple weeks in Chasiv Yar, in the kind of in between Vugledar, Marinka area, and then the Avdiivka sector. And they're really trying to push before these weapons and like all this new artillery from the United States and the Czech Republic pulled this huge deal together with likely South Korea and South Africa to bring in like 1.2 or so million shells. Russia's trying to like get as much ground as possible before that happens, and then it kind of evens back out. But to answer that question from earlier, I don't think that it's going to be a drastic difference like in favor of Ukraine. I think it's going to go back to like evening the odds because Ukraine for the past kind of since fall has been at a disadvantage with ammo, with manpower, and I think that this will help soften that. Also, the mobilization bill went through, so in the next 3 to 6 months, you're going to start seeing more and more Ukrainian soldiers show up that have gone through the training, who have been mobilized, and that'll help relieve a lot of these units who have been kind of just at the front for 2+ years now.
Right. Okay. All right. So sometime after the summer, you're headed back.
Yeah, end of some August, August and September, I'll most likely be there.
Great. Well, again, I thank you for coming in, and I'm going to be calling you probably about this time next year with the new work that you've come back with, and
Yeah, please do.
yeah, and, we love having you, and I'm sure for everyone and all of your colleagues, we pray for your safety all the time. So again, I thank you. If anyone has any questions, we can unmute. And if not, Wolfgang, again, I thank you very, very much for doing this and particularly coming in early because our friend had another assignment, come out of the blue there.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, I
Happy to help.
appreciate
Always
it.
happy to be here. Yeah, does
Go.
anyone have anything that
Yeah,
they
yeah,
want to ask?
yeah.
It's Anya. Sorry, Wolfgang, thank you so much again. This is the second time I've had the opportunity and the honor to watch you present, and it's been fantastic. I had to dial in a little bit late, so I may have missed you saying this in the beginning. Have you noticed an attitude change in the people that you are photographing? Having been in touch with relatives there, some of them up until this latest aid package were kind of, I don't want to say they were not giving up hope, but they were disheartened by the lack of support. So just curious if since you've developed these close relationships with a lot of the folks out there, they must be pretty honest about their sentiments. Do you notice anything, or are they just kind of, especially because they're on the front, single-minded and only focused on the task at hand?
No, Anya, that's a really good question, and I did start to talk about that, but
Yeah.
yeah. So when I first got there,
Sorry.
it was middle of no, it was middle of February. It was after Avdiivka had fallen. I'm sure you've talked to your family about this, where the Avdiivka fell as a result of the lack of aid coming in, the lack of ammunition, the mobilization problems. There wasn't like enough Ukrainian soldiers coming in. Civilians are not, a lot of civilians are not very keen on this mobilization bill, and for good reason, and soldiers for good reason kind of resent civilians that aren't keen on this bill. So there's like a little bit of division there with that. Russia was having a lot of success with their mobilization and success on the ground. So what I had said earlier was that it was a very like deflated feeling and very like grim kind of dark feeling among soldiers and civilians that I was talking to, but not like a defeated, more of like a this is a new reality to the war. And I stopped hearing the like very optimistic like beach party at Sevastopol next year kind of talk. And it turned into like this is going to be very long and very costly. But over the 2 months that I was there, that changed from feeling very bleak to like this is just what it is now. And it was kind of like the same, not as optimistic, but like just people were totally normal and just like all seemingly already adjusted to like this is the way it's going to be and we're going to grind forward, at least on the soldier end of things. But as soon as I left, there was the mobilization bill got passed, and then just this week the aid bill got passed. So I am interested. I've been busy at work here, but I'm interested to talk to some of the friends there on like how they feel with this aid bill coming through. I'm sure that they're over the moon about this.
Thank you for repeating it on my behalf. Really appreciate it.
Oh, of course, of course. Always happy to.
Yeah. Well, and any other questions for our friend? Okay. Well, Wolfgang, I as always, give you the last word. Again, I thank you very much. And as you know, you have a place to come back and, report to us, as we all need to know what you're doing and like I say, your safety. But you can send us off for the evening. And just so everyone knows, we're back on Monday and Tuesday with 2 photographers each night, wonderful colleagues of Wolfgang.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much, guys, for having me as usual. Hopefully that was informative to everybody. And thank you, Frank, for continuing to do this, and Jay for doing this with him every single time. So yeah, I'll let you guys go, but thanks again for the opportunity to speak to all of you.
Okay. Be safe, Wolfgang.
Thanks, Frank.
All right.
Thanks. Hey,
Thanks so much, guys. Have a good rest of the night,
thanks for
everyone.
coming in, Jamie, Liam, Ron, everybody for coming. Judy, Linda, of course, always there with us, and Michelle, I appreciate it very, very much. And like I said, we will see everyone Monday and Tuesday night of next week. So thank you very, very much.